66 million years ago, in the last days of the Cretaceous, morning comes to a coastal forest that will never see another age. The air is warm and heavy with the scent of resin and damp ferns, a world without frost, without ice, where broad-leaved trees lean over a slow, meandering river that drifts toward a shallow inland sea. Light filters down through a high canopy of conifers and flowering branches, not in harsh beams, but in soft green-tinted sheets that sway as the wind moves the crowns. Hadrosaurs stand chest-deep in the water, their broad bills combing through floating plants, each exhale a quiet plume of mist. In the undergrowth, small feathered dinosaurs step carefully between horsetails and cycads, their claws scratching gently at the soil, their bright eyes catching the first hints of day. The forest is never silent. Low, distant calls roll through the trees, the deep-bellied rumble of a tyrannosaur somewhere beyond the ridge, answered by the nasal cries of horned dinosaurs moving in a slow, armoured river of bone and frill. Insects vibrate in clouds over patches of sunlight. Pterosaurs circle above the river mouth, wings catching the morning thermals rising from the warm sea. It feels eternal. It feels as though this world has always been here and will always be here. If you close your eyes for a moment and take a deep breath, you can almost hear the steady rhythm of it, the pulse of an Earth that has known dinosaurs for more than 150 million years. Far above this quiet coast, beyond the blue, beyond the thin veil of air, a different story is unfolding. A rock 6 to 7 miles wide, a mountain of carbonaceous stone and iron, is falling toward the planet at nearly 12 miles per second. It has wandered through space for untold years, guided by the invisible geometry of gravity, storing in its motion an unimaginable reservoir of energy. From the forest floor it is almost nothing. At first only a star that will not quite fade in the brightening sky, a pale point near the horizon over the sea. Then, as the minutes pass, that point swells, too steady, too unwavering, a white seed of fire that refuses to blink. This is the moment we are going to linger in, the thin edge between ordinary morning and the end of an era. The hadrosaurs lift their heads, not at the light, but at a tremor in the air they cannot name. Birds, true birds, small and ground-dwelling, flutter to low branches, restless without knowing why. When the asteroid strikes the shallow waters near what will one day be called Chicxulub, the transition is not gentle. For an instant shorter than a heartbeat, the world is brighter than the surface of the sun. Rock, seawater, and seafloor vaporize, carved aside to open a crater more than 90 miles across. The impact releases the energy of over 100 million nuclear weapons, and yet, on the forest edge, it arrives first as light. Shadows vanish. Every surface glows. Leaves curl and blacken on the branch. Then the shockwave comes, racing outward faster than sound, the ground rolling in waves as if the solid crust has become water. Trees whip and snap. The river leaps its banks. The air itself becomes a hammer. A wall of heat follows, but the sky would have remained a dull iron grey, the sun a weak blurred coin hidden behind a high choking clouds. A sunrise that never comes, a morning held forever at the edge of night. Tonight, we're going to ask what happens to a world when that false dawn stretches not for days or years, but for a century of darkness, and what might have changed if this first act of extinction had unfolded just a little differently. For now, let the modern world fade away. This is the story of an impact, a planet, and the fragile persistence of life, standing on the shore of a day that will not become day. To understand that shore, we're going to step back and widen the frame. 66 million years ago, at the very end of the Cretaceous period, Earth was a warm, high sea level world, with no ice caps and forests stretching almost to the poles. Herds of horned dinosaurs and duck-billed giants moved through floodplains, while tyrannosaurs and sleek, feathered hunters paced the edges of ancient rivers under a humid, insect-filled sky. In that world, the impact was not just a single violent moment. It was the first domino in a long, cold chain of events. When the asteroid struck the shallow seas near what is now the Yucatan Peninsula, it released more energy than billions of Hiroshima-scale bombs, vaporizing rock, seawater, and sulfur-rich sediments in an instant. A crater more than 110 miles wide was gouged into the crust, its central peak ring frozen in place beneath what would one day become the quiet resorts and limestone flats of the modern Yucatan. From that wound, debris arced around the planet. Within hours, tiny glassy droplets rained down, heating the upper atmosphere until forests thousands of miles away may have crackled into flame. Within days, dust, soot, and aerosols spread into a global veil. Sunlight dimmed. Photosynthesis faltered. The world's green engines began to stall. What followed has been compared to a nuclear winter. With less than a tenth of normal sunlight reaching the ground in some models, temperatures plunged, especially on land and in the shallow seas. Plants died back or went dormant. Herbivorous dinosaurs, already stressed by fire and ash, found less and less to eat, and their populations crashed. The great predators that depended on them followed, not in a single night, but over months and years, as each link in the food chain failed. Geologists can trace this collapse in a line no thicker than a finger. Around the globe, from Italian limestones to New Zealand clays, there is a thin boundary rich in iridium, an element rare in Earth's crust but common in meteorites. Mixed into that layer are shocked quartz grains, shaped by unimaginable pressures and tiny spherules of once molten rock. This is the rock record of an extinction that, within a geological instant, erased around 3/4 of all species. Most non-avian dinosaurs vanished. Pterosaurs disappeared. Great marine reptiles, ammonites, and many plankton groups were lost, yet some lineages endured. Small ground-dwelling birds with seed-eating beaks, mammals that could hide, hibernate, and feed on roots and carrion, crocodilians and turtles sheltered in water, able to wait out the famine. Life bent, but did some researchers have calculated that if the Chicxulub impactor had arrived just a little earlier, it would have plunged into deep ocean instead of the shallow shelf. A little later, and it might have buried itself in older, less sulfur-rich crust. The numbers are precise, a difference of hundreds of miles along Earth's orbit, out of a path hundreds of millions of miles long. The consequences are anything but small. Less vaporized rock, less sulfate hurled into the sky, less dust to wrap the planet in darkness. In this gentler branch of possibility, the firestorms still rage around the crater, a wall of water still races across the Gulf, drowning coastlines and tearing forests from their roots. For those dinosaurs who lived within sight of the sea, the day is still a catastrophe beyond comprehension. But the upper atmosphere does not fill with quite so much soot. The sunlight that feeds the world is dimmed, not erased. The century of darkness still comes, yet here it is more a long twilight than a true night. For years the sun is a pale, weak disk behind high clouds of dust, and plants struggle, but they do not fail everywhere at once. Pockets of green persist along rivers, in sheltered valleys, in humid equatorial forests where warmth and moisture soften the blow. Food chains bend, fray, and reroute instead of snapping entirely. In that patchwork world, the dinosaurs endure. Herds of hadrosaurs shrink and retreat to refuges where conifers and ferns still push new fronds through ash-streaked soil. Feathered theropods, warm-blooded and restless, follow the surviving prey through the gloom, their keen senses tuned to a dimmer world. Titanosaurs lumber along floodplains that never quite freeze. High above, a few pterosaurs still ride the weakened thermals, silhouettes against a tarnished sky. This is the story of an extinction that almost was, and of a world that refuses to surrender its giants. We are going to ask, in a slightly kinder universe, how does life navigate this drawn-out crisis? And what kind of Earth emerges when the skies finally clear? What does a dinosaur-ruled planet look like 50 million years later, when new forests rise where the crater once smouldered? We're going to keep our feet gently on solid ground. The speculation to come will be guided by real fossils, real climates, real survival strategies that worked for birds, mammals, and reptiles in our own history. From here, we follow those clues forward into a Cenozoic that belongs not to us, but to the dinosaurs. So we return to our coastal Cretaceous forest, not in the roaring instant of impact, but in the muted light of the morning after. The shock waves have passed, the first tsunamis have withdrawn, and what remains is a world holding its breath. A world that has been shaken, but not silenced. Ash hangs in the air in thin grey veils, softening the outlines of conifers and flowering trees, turning the rising sun into a copper coin behind drifting soot. Here and there, distant fires still crawl along the ridges, low orange lines that hiss and crackle where dry branches fell. The smell is sharp and chemical, a blend of burned resin, scorched fern, and the mineral tang of freshly fractured rock from the distant crater. Along the forest edge, the survivors move. A hadua. The sky is bruised, not black. Patches of forest still stand, green under their ash frosting. The river still flows, muddied but insistent, winding past exposed roots and half-buried logs. The dinosaurs have been here before, in their own way, for more than 165 million years, through volcanic outpourings that built mountain ranges, through swings in sea level that drowned continents and then bared them again, through hothouse climates and cooler interludes, they adapted. This is the story of a lineage that has already survived supervolcanoes, shifting continents, and the slow rearrangement of oceans. One more catastrophe, even one with the energy of 100 million nuclear weapons, does not end everything. We are going to watch them work the problem of survival. Hadrosaurs nose aside fallen fronds to uncover buried seeds and roots, turning to low-value foods they once ignored. Ceratopsians retreat into denser stands of trees, using their horns and frills not for display, but to shove aside debris and defend narrow paths to the water's edge. The small theropods patrol the margins, opportunists feeding on insects drawn to carcasses, on eggs left exposed when nests collapsed, on anything that moves. Take a deep breath and let the modern world fade away as you listen to this altered dawn chorus. Fewer voices, more gaps, but still recognizably a dinosaur planet. Insects still hum. A distant pterosaur, wings singed at the edges, glides low over the river, searching for fish stunned by the shockwaves. Turtles surface among floating leaves. Crocodilians lurk in undercut banks, their scaly eyes level with the ash-dusted shore. We're going to ask a quiet question here. Not whether life survives, because we can already see that it does, but how a world this damaged can remain continuous, how a history can bend without breaking. The answer lies in these wounded forests, in these rivers that refuse to stop, in these dinosaurs that refuse to relinquish their reign. Because from this fragile morning, other mornings will follow, the ash will settle, the fires will burn out, and the century of darkness that looms on the horizon will test every habit and every adaptation they possess. What happens when the days grow dimmer, the plants grow slower, and this shaken world must decide which paths into the future remain open and which must close forever? And as that question hangs in the air, this might be a gentle moment to step half a step back from the crater and from the ash and from the trembling forests of our imaginary Earth. You may be listening to this in the dark, headphones on, eyes already heavy, feeling the last energy of the day ebbing away. You may be lying in bed or curled on a couch, letting your own world fade at the edges while another world, older and stranger, rises in its place. Before we go deeper into that century of darkness, take a deep breath and let the modern world fade away just a little more. This channel exists for nights like this, for slow journeys through deep time, for long unhurried walks through alternate histories where a single impact, a single missed collision, a single diverted rock could change everything. If you find yourself drifting with these images, if the thought of following dinosaurs through frozen forests, or watching the oceans heal over to reach others who are searching for a calm voice in the algorithmic noise, they tell the system that there is a quiet audience for long timelines, for the slow recovery after extinction, for imagining worlds where dinosaurs still walk beneath unfamiliar constellations. We are going to keep the pace gentle. The narrative will continue to unfold slowly and soothingly, with room to breathe between each impact, each turning of the geological clock, so that if sleep arrives it can simply carry you along. You do not have to hold on to every detail. The story will still be here when you return. So let's return to our darkened world, to the moment just after the asteroid strikes, when the fires rage, the skies begin to dim, and within a geological instant, day on this planet starts to learn the language of night. Night is falling on this world, and as it does, your own world can grow softer, dimmer, quieter. If there is a light nearby, this is the moment to turn it down, to let the room sink towards shadow as Earth itself sinks into its long, unnatural dusk. Settle your body where you are, allow your weight to be held, and take a deep breath, as if you are inhaling the first cool winds of the impact winter. The fires are still burning on the horizon, but we're going to step back from the heat and into the calm that follows. Adjust your shoulders, your hands, your jaw, letting small muscles unclench as the energy of the impact fades into a low, distant memory. Let the modern world fade away, the screens, the clocks, the bright electric colours, until there is only the faint glow of ash-filtered daylight over a silent Cretaceous forest. Imagine the air there, warm, humid, heavy with the breath of ferns and cycads, carrying the resin-sweet scent of conifers that have stood for 100 years. Somewhere far off, the last hoarse calls of dinosaurs drift through the trees, a hadrosaur's low bellow, the sharper cry of a small feathered hunter. But each call is muffled now, pressed under a growing veil of dust. You can almost feel that veil on your skin, a fine, cool powder settling on scales and leaves, on water and rock. This is the story of a planet learning to walk through darkness, and we are going to walk with it, not in a hurry, not to arrive anywhere. Think of the documentary now as a long shared walk across a dimmed earth, where each step is its own resting place. A flooded coastal forest here, branches bowed under ash, a quiet lagoon there, turtles and crocodilians tucked into the mud, waiting out the years. You do not need to remember every name, every date, every crater and climate shift. Let those details wash around you like distant waves from a vanished mega tsunami, important to the history of this world, but not something you need to hold. You're simply passing through, letting images rise and fade, a frozen shoreline under a sun that is only a pale disk, a stand of blackened trunks with tiny green shoots returning within a geological instant. Now the pacing slows, sentences stretch, then fall silent. Between them, there is space for your own breathing, your own heartbeat to come forward. If a thought from your day appears, you can notice it, and then set it gently down beside the path, trusting that the story will carry you onward without effort. Between the pale Cretaceous rocks and the darker Paleogene rocks, he found a razor-thin band of clay, just a few inches thick, marking the moment of extinction. His father, Luis Alvarez, a Nobel Prize-winning physicist, joined him in his curiosity. This is the story of a family looking at a quiet smear of clay and asking why it was there at all. They posed a simple problem. That clay layer was rich in iridium, a metal rare in Earth's crust but common in meteorites. The levels were not slightly elevated. They were hundreds of times higher than normal. From that anomaly they made a bold proposal. Within a geological instant, a single colossal impact had thrown a planet's worth of dust and vaporized rock into the sky, settling out as a global blanket of iridium-bearing clay. It would change everything about how we understood the dinosaurs' end. At first, many scientists were unconvinced. Some favored enormous volcanic eruptions, especially the Deccan Traps in India, which had poured out oceans of lava in the final million years of the Cretaceous. Could long, choking decades of volcanic gases and ash have driven a slower extinction without the need for a single catastrophic crater? To decide, researchers turned to fossils, to geochemistry, to climate proxies frozen in shells and sediments, testing each model against the fine-grained record of time. In those records, the iridium spike appeared all over the world, in marine muds and continental rocks alike, a sudden, sharp signal rather than a long smear. Shocked quartz grains, fractured by unimaginable pressures, and tiny glassy spherules formed from molten rock rained down at the same horizon. These pointed back to an impact, but the crater itself remained missing, an absence the size of a small country. Far from Italy, in the late 1970s, a geophysicist named Glenn Penfield was mapping gravity and magnetic anomalies off the Yucatan Peninsula for an oil company. He detected a buried circular structure more than 90 miles across near the village of Chicxulub, but the world was not yet ready to connect this hidden scar with the extinction story. Only in 1990, when marine surveys and drill cores revealed shocked minerals and impact melt rocks of exactly the right age, did Chicxulub emerge as the smoking gun. Science, here, didn't leap in a single bound. It moved through doubt, argument and revision, updating its picture of the world as each new piece of evidence settled into place, like ash on the wind. Tonight, as we are going to ask what might have happened if that rock had missed, we will still honour these constraints, the energy required, the climate shifts observed, the survival patterns measured. Take a deep breath, let the modern world fade away, and carry this detective story with you as we return to the darkness and watch who endures. But there was another darkness gathering, long before the rock from space arrived. Far away from the future crater of Chicxulub, in what is now western India, Earth was already bleeding fire. Lava welled up through great cracks in the crust, spilling in sheets that drowned valleys and buried ancient rivers beneath molten stone. These were the Deccan Traps, a volcanic province so vast that, over a few million years, it would lay down layers of basalt more than a mile thick stacked step. In the late Cretaceous, the Deccan eruptions may have been raising global temperatures by several degrees, loading the atmosphere with CO2 while also sending sulfur into the stratosphere, where it could briefly cool the surface and dim the sun. Imagine dinosaurs walking through forests already coping with heat waves, shifting rainfall and periodic episodes of acidified lakes and dying plankton blooms in the seas. Life was not yet in free fall, but the balance was growing fragile. Modern research, drawing on radiometric dates locked in crystals and chemical fingerprints in ancient shells, now suggests that these two stories converged. Environmental stress from volcanism was building, ecosystems were under strain, and then, in a flash of geological time, the asteroid struck. The century of darkness that followed did not fall on a pristine, stable world. It fell on one already leaning toward the edge. In our alternate timeline, we're going to adjust only one element of this chain. The Deccan Traps still roar. CO2 still climbs. Background climate change still reshapes coastlines and forests. But the impact is different. Perhaps the rock arrives a little earlier or later, splashing into deep water instead of shallow shelf, throwing less pulverized sulfur and dust into the sky. The crater still forms, the shock still echoes, yet the darkness is thinner, the winter shorter, the extinction incomplete. This is the story of a harsh but survivable century in which dinosaurs endure under a sullen, filtered sun, already adapted to a world in flux. It would change everything, not by erasing volcanism or chance, but by softening the sharpest spike of catastrophe. And as we're going to ask what such a world would become, we also honour a quieter lesson, that real science rarely settles for a single cause, preferring tangled, interwoven explanations where many small threads together pull history in a new direction. To see how sharp that spike of catastrophe truly was, paleontologists go to the rocks themselves. They walk the quiet cliffs and road cuts where time is stacked in layers, and they trace a thin, often razor-sharp line that marks the moment of impact. Across millions of years, the story of life on Earth changes. Below that line, the Cretaceous rocks are crowded with dinosaurs and their world. Abundant microfossils of warm water plankton, pollen from flowering forests, shells of thriving marine reptiles prey, the teeth of mosasaurs and sharks. Above it, in the earliest Paleogene, the fossil layers thin out. The great non-avian dinosaurs vanish. So do the ammonites, the large marine reptiles, many plankton species, whole guilds of soaring pterosaurs. What remains at first are survivors. Crocodilian bones in river muds, turtle shells in lake beds, tiny mammal jaws, and crucially, the modest bones of small ground-dwelling birds. That abrupt change is not just a roll call of extinction, it is a fingerprint of climate. Within those same layers, tiny clues record the temperature of ancient seas and air. In the shells of foraminifera, single-celled creatures that rained down on the seafloor for millions of years, the ratio of oxygen isotopes shifts, telling of cooler waters after the impact, of a world where sunlight faltered and the surface ocean chilled. On land, fossil wood preserves growth rings that converge on a disturbing picture. An impact winter, where sunlight at Earth's surface might drop by more than 90%, where photosynthesis all but stops, where the air above the continents cools by tens of degrees. It is eerily close to the nuclear winter scenarios modelled in modern times, where burning cities and forests would dim the sky and starve the food chain. So when we are going to ask you to imagine a century of darkness, we are not drifting free of evidence. We are stretching parameters, extending a years-long pall into a longer, slower recovery. But we stay anchored to these fossils, these isotopes, this ash. Take a deep breath, let the modern world fade away, and follow that thin boundary line in your mind. On one side, the last days of the dinosaurs' real history. On the other, a shadowed Earth our planet never quite knew, but could have if the impact had unfolded just a little differently. On that other side, the change begins almost politely. The morning after the impact, the sky is still blue over much of the world, thin clouds drifting over forests where dinosaurs call and insects hum, as if nothing in the deep past of Earth's history has shifted. But by afternoon, a strange tint creeps in at the horizon, a faint metallic hue edging the familiar dome of air. Day by day, the blue leaches away. The upper sky turns from azure to a washed milky tone, then to a coppery grey, as dust, soot, and sulphurous aerosols climb higher and spread wider. Thin veils at first, then thickening sheets. The sun, once a hard white coin in the Cretaceous noon, softens and reddens, its glare dulled, its energy filtered through a world-spanning haze born from shattered rock and boiling seas. Midday begins to feel wrong. Shadows lose their sharpness, edges blur, colours flatten. In what should be the brightest hours, the light resembles an overcast evening, a permanent late-day twilight. In deep time, stars that once waited for night now appear in the dimming sky while the western horizon is still glowing, and each evening they come a little earlier, as though the heavens themselves are forgetting the script. High above, in the stratosphere, the particles do their quiet work. Tiny fragments of pulverized crater walls, droplets of sulfuric acid, soot from global fires hang in thin, cold air, scattering sunlight in all directions. They bounce the shorter, bluer wavelengths away, letting only a bruised red and copper seep through, and they absorb part of the sun's warmth, heating those upper layers even as the ground below begins to cool. The surface feels the absence more than the presence, less light, less heat, less life. We are going to ask what that feels like from the forest floor. Ferns that once unfurled with the dawn hesitate, some fail to open at all under the weak, discoloured glow. Flowering plants, tuned by millions of years to precise cycles of brightness and dark, begin to miss their cues. Pollinating insects emerge at the wrong times, or not at all, their internal clock slipping as the day loses its familiar shape. Diurnal dinosaurs, built for a world of clear mornings and bright afternoons, grow restless and disoriented. Hadrosaurs lift their heads, blinking into the murk, calling more often, their voices unanswered across distances that feel longer in the gloom. Crest-headed lambeosaurs want, but for the creatures living through it, there is only a slow, unsettling realization taking root. This is not a storm. This is not a season. This is the beginning of a long, uncertain night for the entire planet, a night from which not every lineage will return. The long night begins with fire. In a brief moment of impact, while the great crater is still ringing and the seas are still heaving, the sky itself turns against the world. Tiny fragments of vaporized rock blown high above the atmosphere begin to fall back. They streak in silently at first, a rain of glassy beads, each one no larger than a grain of sand, but together they carry more energy than all the thunderstorms in Earth's history. As they pile into the upper air, they slow, they compress, and they heat. For a brief, terrible window of hours, the high atmosphere glows in the infrared, a planetary broiler turned inward. From the ground, it would feel like a dry, breathless wind of heat pressing down from every direction, igniting leaves, needles, and desiccated undergrowth wherever they lie exposed. Dry forests do not wait for lightning. They simply burst. We're going to move across the continents now through a mosaic of catastrophe. In one frame, a conifer forest on the edge of a Cretaceous floodplain becomes a wall of flame, crowns roaring, resin boiling, trunks collapsing in showers of sparks as hadrosaurs stampede through choking smoke. In another, thousands of miles away, a shallow coastal sea rises and falls in slow, monstrous pulses as tsunamis, born at the impact site, arrive one after another, grinding shorelines into slurry and tossing armoured dinosaurs and tree trunks together in the same tumbling surf. Over the great inland plains, ash begins to fall like dark snow. The heated atmosphere drives towering convective storms, clouds shot through with lightning that has no rain to tame it, only more tinder, more dry brush, more nests and carcasses and fallen branches. This is the story of a world where the horizon glows red on every side. Yet even in this furnace there are shadows that the fire cannot reach. Deep lakes, their surfaces briefly skinned with floating embers, remain cool and dark below a few feet, sheltering fish, turtles, and the larvae of insects. Burrows twist down beneath roots and rocks, buffering the worst of the heat. Their entrance is scorched while their chambers stay merely stifling. Caves breathe in smoke but not flame. Patches of dense, moist forest along rivers and in coastal fog belts resist burning, their saturated soils and broad leaves turning them into accidental lifeboats. Body size, once an advantage in the open, becomes a liability. A 10-ton hadrosaur cannot sprint to a river it cannot reach in time. A towering theropod cannot hide from heat that falls from every angle. Smaller, faster creatures can. Shrew-like mammals, no larger than your hand, vanish into cracks and tunnels in seconds. Ground-dwelling, bird-like dinosaurs dart into burrows, into hollow logs, into the tangled heart of wet thickets, their feathers singed but intact. In one such burrow beneath a smouldering copse at the edge of a lake, a tiny mammal with a pointed snout curls against the packed earth, heart hammering, half in hiding. As the flames race along the treetops and the air itself seems to glow, a small mammal, no larger than your hand, gathers her scattered young and runs not outward, but down. She knows this path. The entrance to the burrow is a dark slit beneath a tangle of roots, half choked with ash and fallen leaves, already warm to the touch. Behind her, the forest roars with burning resin and collapsing trunks. Ahead, there is only a narrow tunnel and the cool, remembered smell of damp soil. This is the story of a wager on depth rather than distance. One by one, the pups vanish into the hole, claws scrabbling, whiskers brushing the earthen walls. The mother follows, her flanks heaving, her heart a tiny metronome of fear and persistence. Above them, re-entering ejecta from the impact heats the sky to oven temperatures. Embers fall like red snow. Below, the sounds arrive muted and delayed. The crack of a falling tree becomes a distant thud. The scream of the wind turns into a low, continuous hum. Down here, the earth itself is the shield. A few handspans of packed sediment blunt the worst of the heat, turning lethal radiance into a slow, bearable warmth. Rock and root intercept falling debris, so that what would crush a skull on the surface becomes a faint shower of dust. The burrow is insulation against extremes, a buffer against the sudden, violent rearrangement of the atmosphere that the impact has forced upon this world. We're going to linger in this dark for a moment. Take a deep breath, and imagine the way vibrations replace vision. Each distant concussion from the crater's shockwaves arrives as a tremor through pores and ribs. The mammal family huddles in a cramped chamber, pressed against stored seeds and insect husks, against each other, their bodies turning shared fear into shared heat. They are not alone in choosing depth. In other parts of this dying forest, small feathered dinosaurs that once nested in shallow scrapes now retreat to inherited burrows, spiraling tunnels dug in quieter years by their ancestors. Lizards vanish into rock crevices, wedged so tightly their ribs barely rise. Amphibians slide down into cracks laced with groundwater. Insects retreat through the labyrinth of the soil, or into the pulpy hearts of rotting logs, where fire is only a distant rumour. Burrowing is more than a hiding place. It is a strategy written into bone and metabolism. Creatures that can slow their internal engines, entering torpor or something close to it, can stretch a cache of roots, seeds, or stored fat across days when no fresh food appears. On a darkened earth where photosynthesis falters and the food web collapses from the top down, the ability to idle rather than race may be the difference between endurance and extinction. We are going to ask, how long can a heartbeat wait? In the tight air of these chambers, eyes adjust to a darkness that will soon match the surface. Dozens of tiny gazes, mammal and reptile and insect stare into the black, listening for the roar above to fade, not yet knowing that the true danger is not the fire, but the famine and the frozen years still on their way. Above those cramped burrows and flooded hollows, the surface world is changing in ways that roots can already feel. The fires have passed. The raw graze or browse upon it. There is a threshold, though, a minimum brightness. Below it, photosynthesis slows, then stalls. The plant still breathes, still spends energy to stay alive, but it cannot earn enough in return. Under the asteroid's veil, much of Earth slips beneath that line. Flowers open late or not at all, petals dull and cold, their nectar production faltering, their seeds failing to swell. Forest edges that once blazed with colour become muted, washed out, as if the world has been left in the developer tray too long and the image will never fully appear. Not all plants suffer equally. Fast-growing light-hungry pioneers, the species that rush into clearings and floodplains, are the first to falter. Their wide, thin leaves, built for abundance, sag and yellow at the margins. In contrast, hardy evergreens, with their narrow needles and slower metabolisms, can endure longer, sipping the faint light that filters through. Ferns, coiled in the understory, unroll cautiously, their fronds adapted to shade even in better years. Seed-bearing plants with deep reserves in roots and trunks can pull on stored sugars, stretching their lives out week by hungry week. And beneath the soil, another strategy waits. We'll ask, what if survival does not mean staying awake? Many plants retreat into dormant stages, turning themselves into time capsules, seeds wrapped in tough coats, spores, dust fine and patient, bulbs and tubers buried in the cool dark. These are seed banks, living archives scattered through the sediment, able to endure months, years, sometimes decades until light and warmth return. There is a pattern interrupt here, quiet but profound. The forest is not only what stands above ground, it is also what sleeps below. As leaves produce less sugar, herbivores feel the change almost at once. Small, nimble feeders that can switch to seeds, spores, bark, or carrion may scrape through the first lean weeks. Huge plant-eating dinosaurs with bodies tuned to constant abundance must walk farther, chew longer, burn more energy to find each fading mouthful. Take a deep breath and imagine their choices narrowing with each dim day. Soon, the fate of every plant-eater will hinge on one question. How long can they last when the green engine of the world is idling in the dark? In the muffled twilight of the impact winter, a giant moves through the forest. A hadrosaur, 40 feet from muzzle to tail, shoulders dusted in ash, pushes between blackened trunks that once sang with insects and birds. Each step sends up a slow grey halo, a ghost of the world that was. Its beak reaches for familiar fronds and tender shoots, but the ferns are wilted, the cycads stripped, the canopy above a tangle of dead silhouettes against a sky that never brightens beyond dull iron. This is the story of a body built for abundance, trapped in a season of famine that will last for years. Large dinosaurs carry immense reserves of flesh and fat. That mass is a shield, a buffer, a way to stride across Earth with confidence when the green engine is roaring. But scaling laws are merciless. Double an animal's length and its mass and its hunger more than octuples. The big herbivore can survive longer without eating than a tiny mammal, yet each day of survival burns through an itch. They raid carcasses when they find them, crossing the old boundary between herbivore and scavenger, because in this new world, purity of diet becomes a luxury. Predators face the same arithmetic. Apex carnivores, towering tyrannosaurs with skulls longer than you are tall, once ruled by force of size and speed. Now they rule over emptiness. Herds have thinned, calls are fewer, and each high-speed chase risks more energy than the meat will repay. Around their dwindling territories, smaller theropods and mammals slip through the undergrowth following the scent of death. They do not need a full hadrosaur. A strip of tendon, a half-buried bone rich with marrow, a clutch of eggs abandoned in cooling sand is enough. Let the modern world fade away for a moment and imagine that quiet competition, unfolding under a sun that is only a rumour behind dust. The giants are not instantly erased. This is no clean, sudden extinction. In sheltered valleys, along equatorial coasts where volcanic warmth and stubborn greenery persist, pockets of large dinosaurs endure. A few herds of ceratopsians haunt river corridors. A lineage of smaller tyrannosaurs clings to life on coastal plains, where ocean winds thin the ash. Across millions of years, the balance of power has shifted. The era of effortless gigantism is over, but not every giant has fallen. In the next chapter, we follow those refugees and ask how a wounded world slowly begins to knit itself back together around the survivors who held on. So we follow the survivors away from the burning forests and thinning coastal plains, down into a different refuge, where the fires on the horizon become only a distant glow on a darkened sky. The world narrows to a broad, slow river, its surface smeared with ash, its currents carrying the charred remains of branches and the occasional silent body of a fallen giant. Under this dim, permanent twilight, the river is a moving mirror for a sun that barely shows through the veil. Each ripple catches a faint, cold gleam before it folds back into shadow. Dead wood drifts past in slow procession, turning and bumping together with soft, hollow knocks, while the air above the water smells of wet silt, smoke, and the long, low ache of an earth still ringing from impact. Below that drifting wreckage, the water is quieter. Crocodilians lie pressed to the riverbed, armoured backs outlined in the murk, eyes half closed, lungs full, hearts slowing. They can wait. For hours they barely move, suspended between waking and sleep, their bodies tuned by millions of years to endure feast and famine, flood and drought, now meeting an almost unimaginable test. Nearby, turtles have vanished from sight, buried in the soft mud, shells and skulls tucked beneath a blanket of silt that muffles sound and temperature together. Deeper still, where the light has always been scarce, schools of fish circle through a cooler, more stable layer. The ash that falls from above settles out before it reaches them in full, and the worst of the heat from surface firestorms has already been blunted by the water's mass. Water is a shield. It absorbs energy, softens temperature swings, and turns what is chaos in the open air into a slow, filtered version of the same events. On land, the temperature can spike and stored energy one molecule at a time, waiting for the sky to brighten. In our alternate history, these same waters shelter more than reptiles and fish. Along shadowed banks and in drowned clearings where trees have fallen, small dinosaurs learn to haunt the margins. Feathered, long-legged omnivores pick along the reeds, probing for stranded invertebrates and dead fish, then vanish into the undergrowth at the faintest ripple from a lurking jaw. This traces dinosaurs discovering that rivers and lakes are not just boundaries in their territories, but lifelines, corridors of relative stability threading through a damaged continent. Take a deep breath and let the modern world fade away for a moment, because in this river system, we now watch evolution improvise in real time. Ash continues to fall, the years of dimness stretch on, and somewhere downstream, where this river broadens into a vast shielding sea, a different kind of sanctuary is forming, one that will shelter not only the old reptilian dynasties, but the first experiments in a new coastal way of being dinosaur. Downstream, where the river exhales into the shielding sea, the water deepens and the light begins to fail. Ash from distant continents drifts down through the surface layers, a grey snow settling on waves that no longer glitter as they once did, but beneath that dim, troubled skin, another world waits. Let's follow a single shaft of fading daylight as it sinks. At first, there is still colour, scattered beams, pale greens and blues, plankton turning the last photons into fragile chains of life. But foot by foot the glow thins, reds vanish, then oranges, then even the blues fade to a smoky dusk. Within a few hundred feet during this century of darkness, noon resembles a cloudy twilight. Deeper still, the twilight gives way to night, a permanent, absolute night. Here, the impact winter above is almost an abstraction. The great clouds of dust and soot that wrapped Earth, the fires that swept the continents, the dinosaurs that starved beneath a sunless sky. These are distant rumours, carried down only as a sparser rain of dead plankton and ash. The deep ocean has always been a realm where sunlight is a memory, not a currency. Take a deep breath, and let the modern world fade away as the last usable light disappears. In this blackness, pinpricks of living fire appear, the cold blue-green glows of bioluminescent fish and drifting jellies, tiny signals in an endless void. But even these ghosts of light are not what truly power this place. Far below, where the seafloor splits and Earth's crust is pulled apart, another kind of energy rises. At the mid-ocean ridges, hot, mineral-rich water gushes from cracks in the rock, building chimneys of metal sulfides that tower like ruined cathedrals. Around these hydrothermal vents, bacteria cluster in dense invisible films, capturing chemical gradients the way surface plants once captured sunlight. This is chemosynthesis, life drawing its strength not from the sky, but from the planet's interior. Around the chimneys, forests of giant tube worms bloom, their white stalks and crimson plumes waving in the heated currents. They have no mouths, no digestive tract, almost unchanged, a slow, steady pulse in the abyss. It would reshape how stand here and know that, in the darkest chapter of Earth's history, life did not end. It simply shifted its weight, leaned on older, deeper sources of energy, and waited. And somewhere above these chimneys, in shallower, murkier waters, other survivors are also waiting, tracing the first faint outlines of the world that will follow. Far above the slow, mineral heartbeat of the vents, the ocean shallows and drowned coasts are quiet in a different way. The great reptiles are gone, their shadows no longer cross the broken ferns. But the silence is not complete. If let's understand how Earth keeps breathing through this long night, we have to kneel to bring our attention down to the level of the leaf litter. Here, under a sky of ash and a sun reduced to a pale, uncertain glow, the forest floor still moves. Beetles, shielded in chitinous armor, burrow through layers of soot and fallen needles, feeding on dead wood that still remembers the energy of vanished summers. Ants thread through the debris in narrow, shimmering columns, carrying fragments of fungus, scraps of softened bark, and sometimes the bodies of other insects. Millipedes roll and unroll in slow concertinas, turning leaf to soil, corpse to compost. The green world above is failing. Photosynthesis has been throttled, starved of light by dust and smoke from the impact, and many plants have stopped growing altogether. Yet down here, in the dim, the food web does not begin with fresh leaves reaching for the sky, but with what has fallen. This is a detritus-based world, powered by decay rather than by new growth, a world in which the dead feed the living in an almost closed circle. Rotting trunks, charred branches, and the bodies of dinosaurs and mammals alike become reservoirs of carbon and nutrients. Fungi send pale threads, hyphae, into this banquet, infiltrating wood and bone, secreting enzymes that dissolve what seemed solid. Bacteria swarm in invisible films, finishing what the fungi begin, turning complex molecules into simpler forms that roots, when they wake again, will be able to drink. This concerns a planet quietly cleaning up after its own catastrophe. Seeds lie buried within this matrix, tiny sealed time capsules scattered before the fires and the darkness. Many have hard coats that resist heat and drought, designed by evolution for ordinary droughts and winters, but now pressed into service for a century of darkness. Spores, even smaller and lighter, ride the turbulent air, settle and wait. Some may remain viable for years, even decades, holding within their shells entire future forests that have not yet seen the sky. If you take a deep breath here and let the modern world fade away, you can almost feel the tension in that waiting. We'll ask, what does patience mean on a world scale when an ecosystem must hold its breath for generations? Each seed, each spore, each dormant root is a promise written in biological code that, when the light returns, green will follow. The work of fungi and bacteria ensures that when that moment comes, the ground will not be sterile ash, but rich, dark, susceptibly at first to brighten. These small engines of survival are already in motion, winding the spring for the next act. The question is not whether life will return to the scarred continents, but in what shapes and along which unexpected paths that resurgence will unfold. In that dim, ash-muted dawn, as the first weak hints of sunlight begin to seep through the dust, another kind of scavenger moves between the blackened trunks. Small ground-dwelling birds, no bigger than a modern quail, pick carefully through the powdery drifts, their feet leaving delicate star-shaped prints in the cooling world. Their feathers are fluffed against the chill, catching what little heat remains as they probe for buried seeds, stunned insects, and fragments of what used to be a forest in full leaf. This is about dinosaurs that do not tower or roar, but whisper and rustle, because birds are dinosaurs in the strict technical sense, the last surviving branch of a theropod family tree that once ran from tiny feathered hunters to apex predators the size of buses. In our real Earth's history, they are among the very few dinosaurian lineages to step across the line of extinction and into the Cenozoic. In this alternate history, where the impact winter is terrible but not absolute, they are still poised on that same knife edge between disappearance and endurance. We linger with them for a moment. Small size is an advantage now. A body that needs little energy can wait out lean days and colder nights. Tucked into burrows stolen from mammals or crevices in fallen logs. High reproductive rates mean that even if many chicks perish in the first brutal seasons, enough will hatch and fledge to keep the lineage going. Their diets are flexible, tuned not to a single kind of fruiting tree or a single shoal of fish, but to whatever can be swallowed. Hard, durable seeds that survive the fires, beetle grubs deep in dead wood, morsels of detritus scraped from the edges of shrinking streams. Nests, too, are changing. Instead of open bowls high in the canopy, exposed to cold winds and hungry eyes, many of these birds now place their eggs in sheltered pockets close to the ground, under tangles of fallen branches, in cavities where the ash does not drift so thick. In a flash of geological time, behaviour becomes fate. Not every feathered creature is so fortunate. Larger, more specialised bird-like dinosaurs, some with wingspans wider than a small aircraft, depended on endless greenery, on rivers teeming with fish, on insect swarms rising every evening in warm, humid air. Their narrow niches become traps in a crisis. When the forests thin and the insects crash, when prey vanishes from the surface waters, those elegant specialists find that there is no room left to adapt. But here, in this tempered catastrophe, we'll ask a quieter question. What if a few non-avian, feathered lineages share the same survival toolkit as their smaller bird cousins? Imagine waist-high, ground-running predators, cousins of Velociraptor, already adapted to eating anything they can overpower or unearth, already nesting in burrows and communal scrapes. Imagine shaggy, beaked omnivores, half ostrich, half theropod, gorging on seeds and carrion with equal enthusiasm. In this world, some of them make it through. They hunker down, breed fast, and follow the birds into the future, bridging the age of towering reptiles and the age when mammals will finally rise that once poured down without effort. At noon, under this new ceiling, the world glows in a dull twilight, as if the sun has been pushed to arm's length and wrapped in gauze. Photos of volcanic eruptions in our own history hint at this, but here the veil is global, continuous, renewed by each swirling eddy in the high atmosphere. The energy that once drove roaring thunderstorms and lush plant growth is reduced to a faint cold glow. Forests that had been bright mosaics of colour become monochrome silhouettes, every leaf outlined in ash. The climate follows the light. With so little solar energy reaching the surface, temperatures plunge across millions of years. Summers contract into brief chilly interludes. Winters deepen and lengthen, advancing into latitudes that had not known frost for millions of years. Shallow seas cool, then crust over with seasonal ice, and at the poles, new caps of snow and frozen ocean begin to spread, pale mirrors reflecting still more of the weakened sunlight back into space. For the dinosaurs that remain, this is not just cold. It is a reordering of time. Places that once knew months of abundant growth now endure stunted seasons, where seedlings barely emerge before the first frosts return. Rivers carry fragile ice. Wetlands shrink and harden. Herds that had migrated by the angle of the sun now move under an almost unchanging grey, guided more by memory than by sky. Rainfall patterns fracture and rearrange. Some regions, once fed by towering convective storms, fall into a long, bitter dryness, their clouds stolen by distant circulation cells. Others sink beneath a ceiling of low, unbroken cloud, where drizzle falls for days, then weeks, then years, a thin, cold mist beading on feathers and scales, seeping into soil that never quite warms. Imagine walking through a Cretaceous forest where the soundtrack is no longer cicadas and distant calls, but the soft, endless hiss of water from a sky that never clears. This traces 100 years of twilight. It is important to say that this century of darkness is not pure cinematic black. Even at its worst, the sky holds a smeared suggestion of day, a direction where the hidden sun presses faintly against the ash. But that dimness is enough to depress photosynthesis almost everywhere. Giant ferns and flowering trees fade. Low hardy shrubs, algae beneath ice, and buried seeds become the quiet engines that keep the food web from absolute collapse. And yet, dust does not stay aloft forever. We now ask what patience means on a planetary scale, because over decades the heaviest particles fall first, then the finer aerosols thinning the veil grain by grain. The overcast remains, but the twilight very slowly grows less deep. Somewhere, in what will one day be called the late Paleocene, a small feathered predator pauses at the edge of a frozen river as evening comes. The clouds are still there, but along the horizon there is, for the first time in living memory, a band of colour that is not just grey. Everything afterward would be different. The long night is not over, not yet. But in that slightly brighter line, the world survivors receive their first, almost imperceptible hint that the darkness is beginning, very slowly, to lift. Breathe out slow darkness means that photons are finally making their way back to the surface in numbers that plants can use. This is about what happens next, when the first green shoots dare to rise into that uncertain light. At first, they are not towering forests or lush Cretaceous jungles reborn, but low carpets of moss gathering in the shelter of fractured boulders, delicate ferns uncurling from blackened logs, and wiry, hardy shrubs anchoring themselves in ash-choked gullies. Their roots wedge into cracks left by the blast, trapping loose grains, catching dust, knitting together what had been drifting, lifeless sediment. With every season, dead stems and fallen leaves begin to form the first thin films of soil, a living skin on a wounded planet. Ecologists call this slow choreography succession, and we walk through it gently. Bare ground comes first, scoured by fire and ice. Then, inch by inch, those pioneer plants arrive, holding the surface in place, adding nutrients as they die. Grasses and low herbs follow, turning grey expanses into muted meadows. Shrubs thicken, creating pockets of shade and shelter. Only much later, when roots have deepened and the climate has steadied, do young trees rise, their canopies knitting into the first true forests since the catastrophe. Across millions of years, in terms of Earth's long history, a sterile cratered landscape becomes a patchwork of living rooms for returning animals. The dinosaurs that survived, smaller feathered hunters and stocky beaked herbivores, begin to test these new paths of green. A flock of ground-dwelling birds picks through fern fronds for seeds and insects. A wary, half-grown theropod follows the scent of grazing, discovering that fresh shoots have drawn in small herds of plant-eaters. Alongside them, shrew-like mammals creep farther from their refuges, nibbling on spores, seeds, and the occasional insect that has come to feed on the pioneers. But this recovery is not even, and it would reshape how life spreads. Some valleys remain locked under lingering clouds, their rivers edged with only the thinnest moss. Other ridges, exposed to clearer winds, are already brushed with shrubs and the first saplings. From above, if you could imagine drifting in slow orbit, Earth would look like a mosaic. Islands of green stitched across seas of ash and frozen mud. Refuges separated by dead zones. Let's ask how life will bridge those gaps, how forests will reclaim the silence, and how new lineages will rise from these fragile beginnings. From a distance, these green patches look continuous, a slow healing of the wounded continents. But as the years slide past, a different pattern emerges. The world is breaking into islands that are not surrounded by water, but by cold, by drought, and by the lingering shadow of the impact winter. Across what will one day be the interior of a northern continent, a single valley holds on, sheltered by ridges that deflect the worst of the polar winds. Fed by meltwater that seeps from fractured rock, it remains temperate while the uplands freeze and brown. Here, mist gathers each morning in the hollows, and conifers and broad-leaved trees weave a low, protective canopy over ferns and horsetails that never quite died back. In this soft basin, dinosaurs endure in numbers that would seem impossible just a few hundred miles away. A remnant herd of hadrosaurs, populations that once mingled are trapped in different pockets of survivable climate. Gene pools that were once shared are now partitioned, and small accidental differences begin to accumulate. A hadrosaur in this valley leans toward compact limbs and dense insulating plumage. Its cousins, far to the south in a coastal swamp, grow longer legs for wading and a broader beak for sieving tough aquatic plants. Thousands of years pass, then millions. Divergence hardens into destiny. Mammals, too, are experimenting in these hidden laboratories. In one burrow system near the valley stream, a lineage of insect eaters stretches toward new sizes, some remaining mouse-small and nocturnal, others pushing into rabbit-sized omnivores that forage in twilight, testing seeds, carrion, and even the shed feathers of sleeping dinosaurs. Their teeth, once simple, begin to show more elaborate ridges and cusps, tiny architectural changes that open doors to new diets. We'll ask what happens when each refuge follows its own quiet rules. In some, dinosaurs shrink, becoming nimble, omnivorous generalists. In others, they grow heavier and shaggier, turning into cold-tolerant grazers that churn the soil and recycle nutrients with every step. Predators refine pack behavior, coordinating low, whispered calls, learning to read one another's posture in the half-light beneath the trees. Soften your shoulders and drift here for a while for a moment. Imagine standing at the edge of this valley, knowing that similar islands of survival are scattered across Earth, each with its own relict faunas, its own experiments in body size, in diet, in social bonds. The consequences would echo forward, because from these isolated lineages, some dinosaurs are not merely surviving the near extinction. They're quietly preparing to dominate the next tens of millions of years, while the mammals at their feet, for now, remain in the shadows. The question is, which of these hidden islands will set the pattern for the future? In our own world's history, the shadows did not last. When the impact at Chicxulub carved its crater into the crust and drove the non-avian dinosaurs to extinction, it opened an emptiness in the daylight, a vacancy in forests and plains and seas, and in deep time mammals began to pour into it. Tiny, shrew-like insect eaters diversified into grazing herbivores, pursuit predators, gliders and swimmers, and tens of millions of years later, into primates watching the sunrise with wondering eyes. This is about a different Earth, where that sudden vacancy never truly appears. Here, the century of darkness is brutal, but it is not absolute, and enough medium-sized dinosaurs endure that. When the skies finally clear, they step back into the light and reclaim many of the roles their cousins once held. Feathered theropods prowl the undergrowth and the river margins. Beaked, fleet-footed herbivores browse the new growth in recovering forests. The great outlines of the old Cretaceous food webs bend, but they do not break. Under this lingering reptilian canopy, mammals remain what they had been for so many millions of years before the impact, small, cautious, and mostly nocturnal. They run the narrow corridors of safety that the dinosaurs ignore. Some cling to the bark of trees, hunting insects under loose scales of lichen. Others nest under rotting logs, in burrows, or in the tangled roots along riverbanks, whiskers, for flexible diets that can shift when a flood sweeps through, or a cold year thins the insects, but less for the kind of large day-active visual cortex that underpins primate vision and, in our world, human reading, drawing, and planning. Let your breath slow, and imagine an Earth where the experiments in cleverness are happening under leaves and in tunnels, not in open, sunlit canopies. Tonight, we ask a quiet question here and then leave it hanging for a while. If primates never quite find their foothold in this dinosaur-ruled Cenozoic, if tree trunks are already crowded with clawed, feathered forms by day and with small, furtive mammals by night, does anything resembling a human ever appear? Or does the long arc of intelligence bend toward a very different shape, carried in a skull that hatched from an egg, under the watchful eyes of a parent with scales and feathers rather than fur? Let the modern world fade away for a moment as that question lingers, because to follow it, we now trace the dinosaurs themselves into colder times, into new continents and new climates, to see what kinds of minds begin to flicker behind their eyes. As the world cools and the forests change, the dinosaurs do not vanish into myth. They lean into the new earth and begin, patiently, to redraw themselves. This traces a lost age rebuilt, not from nothing, but from the scattered survivors who rode out earlier impacts and climate lurches, and now find fresh branches of possibility opening in front of them. In the recovering lowland forests, where ferns and flowering trees reclaim floodplains scarred by ancient rivers, small hadrosaur descendants nose through the undergrowth. They are no longer the multi-ton giants of the late Cretaceous, but deer-sized grazers with narrower snouts and deeper chests, slipping between trunks in loose family bands, their soft calls echoing under the canopy. Beside them, modest ceratopsians, no bigger than ponies, carry shortened frills and forward-curving brow horns, perfect for shoving rivals aside in dense thickets and for fending off the predators that still haunt the shadows. Further inland, on upland plateaus where the trees grow taller and the light thins, dwarf sauropods reappear as if summoned from an older chapter of history. Their ancestors once shook the ground with every step. These descendants stand only twice the height of a person, with compact bodies and surprisingly flexible necks, weaving through branches to strip leaves with careful, deliberate bites. In colder latitudes, armoured dinosaurs answer the chill in a different way, their plates and spikes draped in filamentous feather-like coverings that trap air and warmth, converging on the role that woolly rhinos and musk oxen would have played in another timeline. Out on the open country, where grasses and tough shrubs spread across broad basins, swift, ostrich-like omnivores take command of the middle ground. Long-legged, long-tailed, with toothless beaks and clever forward-facing eyes, they sprint in flocks over the pale soil, plucking seeds, insects, and the occasional lizard. In a flash of geological time, their body plan echoes that of the future ostriches and emus that will never evolve here, a reminder that convergent evolution has its own quiet logic, nudging different lineages towards similar answers. Predators settles into place. The names are invented, the exact shapes uncertain, but the structure of the ecosystem is familiar. Browsers and grazers, diggers and climbers, sprinters and stalkers, all locked into flows of energy that bind floodplain to mountaintop. We now ask, as climates continue to swing and continents drift, What happens when this dinosaur world meets the spread of true grasslands and the pressures that once forged horses and antelope in our own history? It would reshape the world again. As grasslands creep across the lowlands and herds of dinosaurs test this new, open world, the forests do not fall silent. High above the browsing necks and armoured backs, the canopy is waking into its own revolution. A green roof stitched together by branches, lianas, and most of all, wings. Soften your shoulders and imagine standing at the forest edge as morning haze thins into shafts of filtered sunlight, each beam alive with drifting insects and the silhouettes of feathered shapes passing through. This is about the skies filling in. Small birds, descendants of those that once sheltered through the century of darkness on seeds and detritus, now flit in restless flocks from crown to crown, their calls overlapping into a soft, ceaseless chorus. Between them glide larger, stranger forms, long-tailed, feathered dinosaurs with broad, membranous wings fringed in quills, using warm updrafts to cross the gaps above new rivers and expanding clearings. In their wake, trail clouds of beetles, flies, and tiny wasps, the airborne plankton of this recovering world. Across millions of years, beaks begin to specialize. Some birds carry short, crushing bills, perfect for cracking the tough armored seeds of early flowering trees that recolonize the ash-choked soils after the impact. Others wield long, probing beaks that can reach deep into pendant flowers, sipping nectar and brushing against pollen-laden anthers, turning each feeding visit into an act of fertilization. High-speed insect hunters develop narrow pointed wings and wide gaping mouths ringed with bristles, tuned to snap up midges and moths in the dim green tunnels between trunks. Where the forest opens onto river corridors and proto-grasslands, powerful flyers emerge with long scything wings, riding thermals above the mixed herds below. Some dive for fish in oxbow lakes. Others, with hooked beaks and forward-facing eyes, seize small vertebrates from branches and burrows, raptors in all but name. Their feathered dinosaur cousins, heavier of body but gifted with four-winged glides or short explosive flights, patrol the mid-canopy, pouncing on lizards, climbing mammals, and even unwary nestlings. Predator and prey now meet not only on the ground, but in 3 dimensions, in a lattice of perches, clearings, and invisible air lanes. Plants, in turn, recruit these flyers as partners. Fruits evolve brighter pigments and thinner skins, packaging seeds in sugary rewards that invite birds to swallow them whole and carry them miles away before depositing them with a small dose of fertilizer. Sticky or barbed seeds cling to leg feathers and tail plumes. Pollen dusts foreheads and throats. Every flight path becomes a corridor of genetic exchanges and favouring the small, the flexible, the feathered survivors who could endure on seeds in the dark. Now their descendants rule the air, weaving energy from sun to leaf to wing in an ever more intricate pattern. And as their shadows pass over the first true grasslands and the snouts of watching mammals, another frontier is opening, one that will demand even faster legs, sharper senses, and perhaps sharper minds. But down beneath those beating wings and widening grasslands, another revolution is unfolding, quieter, rooted, and patient. This concerns forests remade, of a plant kingdom that has learned from darkness and is now rewriting the surface of Earth in leaf and flower. When the impact winter finally loosened its grip, the first to answer the returning light were the angiosperms, the flowering plants. They had endured the century of dimness as seeds buried in ash, as roots holding tight to frozen mud, as tiny buds waiting on half-dead stems. Now, in a flash of geological time, they surge forward, reclaiming hillsides and riverbanks, turning the world into a mosaic of colour and scent. Petals unfold in crimson and gold. Pollen dusts the air. nectar wells in hidden chambers, tiny reservoirs of energy that will bribe animals into service. The new climate helps to sort this explosion into distinct realms. Near the poles, where cooling has bitten deepest, evergreen conifers and hardy ginkgos form dense shadowed dinosaur forests, their needles and fan-shaped leaves catching low slanting light. Feathered herbivores with insulating down browse beneath them, scraping lichen from bark, plucking tough shoots that survived the long cold. Close to the equator, warmth and moisture gather into permanent summer. Here, broadleaf angiosperms, towering tree ferns and early palms weave tropical jungles, their canopies dripping with epiphytes, their trunks wrapped in flowering vines that climb toward the sun. We'll ask how these plants and the dinosaurs that move among them change one another. In the open clearings, low shrubs evolve thicker, more fibrous leaves, laced with bitter tannins or subtle toxins. A hadrosaur that once cropped soft Cretaceous foliage now faces a new menu, and its descendants respond: broader dental batteries with more tightly packed grinding surfaces and deeper bellies where microbial partners ferment the difficult meal. In another valley, cycads and young angiosperm trees arm themselves with spines, while ankylosaurs answer with wider shovel-shaped snouts that can strip foliage between the thorns. Then a pattern interrupt in green and chitin. Insects, beetles, wasps, butterflies, and a riot of flies discover the rewards hidden in flowers and cones. Their visits are not random. Wings dusted with pollen turn each journey into a genetic bridge between plants. Small, nimble dinosaurs with proto-wings snap at them, and some, over millions of years, refine those feathered limbs into true flight, joining birds in the air. Now humming, fluttering and gliding pollinators stitch the forest together, while fruit-eating birds and small theropods swallow seeds and release them far from the parent tree, planting tomorrow's canopy with every step. Lake that belongs not to mammals, but to the descendants of those century of darkness survivors. To understand this history that never happened, let's borrow the real timeline of our own Earth and quietly exchange the cost. In the Paleocene, the world is still warm, recovering from the impact's long winter, its skies clearing, its oceans slowly recharging with light and energy. On our Earth, this is when small mammals begin to diversify into new shapes. But here, they do so in the shadow of recovering dinosaurs. Lean, feathered hunters slipping through fern thickets, stocky beaked browsers testing the first post-impact forests, crocodilians and turtles still patient in the rivers. Mammals remain quick, clever, mostly small. Their larger experiments pushed back whenever a dinosaur clade expands into the same niche. By the Eocene, greenhouse conditions peak. Polar regions are frost-free, and tropical belts swell with steaming forests. This is about canopy dwellers and swamp walkers, long-clawed theropods climbing through tangled branches, parrot-beaked plant-eaters stripping leaves under perpetual thunderheads, pterosaurs circling over warm inland seas. On our real planet, early horses and primates tiptoe into these habitats. Here they persist as furtive insect eaters and seed crackers, rarely heavier than a dog, often driven to the night while dinosaurs own the day. Then comes the Oligocene, and with it, cooling. Ice first grips Antarctica, sea levels fall and forests fragment into mosaics of woodland and open scrub. In deep time, some dinosaurs follow the trees, shrinking and specializing, while others venture into the open, legs lengthening, strides stretching. Herds of beaked herbivores sweep across new grass-like plants, chased by cursorial, pack-hunting theropods, whose feathers now double as insulation against chill winds. A few mammal lineages test larger bodies here, pig-sized rooters and antelope-like grazers, but where climates swing hardest, established dinosaur herds, with their fast growth and egg-based reproduction, usually reclaim the ground. In the Miocene, true grasses surge, and the grassland revolution that reshaped our real world also transforms this one. Imagine vast inland plains on every continent, crater-pocked highlands now wrapped in golden savannas. Heavy-jawed, battery-toothed herbivorous dinosaurs evolve low-browsing muzzles and deep chests for fermenting tough silica-rich blades. Their predators become long-snouted sprinters, converging in form with the cheetahs our history would know. We now ask, what does intelligence look like here? Perhaps in coordinated hunts, in complex calls echoing at dusk across the plains. Later, in the Pliocene and Pleistocene, as ice advances and retreats, cold-adapted forms dominate the high latitudes. Shaggy, feather-cloaked herbivores trudge through periglacial steppe, fat reserves carried in tails and hips, while their hunters wear dense down under filamentous outer feathers, breathing thin air with bird-like lungs. On islands cut off by rising and falling seas, both dinosaurs and mammals dwindle into dwarfs, miniaturized tyrants and toy-sized horned giants, sharing cliffs and coastal scrub. All the while, the planet is the same, but faces and planned for futures measured in seasons. New Caledonian crows bend twigs into hooks and pass that knowledge along. Parrots hold elaborate social lives together with calls and mimicry. Even in the fossil record, brain cavities of certain theropods hint at relatively large brains, while trackways and bone beds suggest pack hunting, care for the young, and coordinated movement across floodplains and coastal scrub. In this altered story, those hints do not vanish in an instant of fire and cratered rock. They deepen. Among the undergrowth, small, omnivorous, feathered theropods patrol the leaf litter, clever generalists that eat seeds, insects, eggs, and carrion. Over tens of millions of years, as climates shift and grasslands expand, tonight we ask what happens if one such lineage becomes more social, more communicative, and gradually more dexterous, their forelimbs freeing into grasping semi-winged hands as they climb, glide, and manipulate. There are constraints. A big brain is hungry tissue, demanding energy in a world where droughts, cold snaps, and volcanic winters still come and go. Dinosaurian lungs are efficient, but their tails and balancing postures may limit how far forelimbs can specialize without sacrificing speed or stability. Ecological pressures would need to reward not only sharper senses, but the slow, expensive path toward fancier problem-solving, toward tool use that changes survival odds, toward vocal signals that begin to behave like language. Perhaps, on some windswept plateau, bands of these feathered omnivores learn to crack open tough seeds with stones, then to drop rocks on armored insects, then to cache food in hidden crevices and remember those places years later. Their calls might grow into layered songs, carrying information about predators, food, and distant waterholes, the way prairie dogs and certain birds encode surprising detail in simple sounds. Breathe out slowly and imagine intricate nest-building societies, where entire colonies engineer woven platforms in cliff faces or floating reed cities on warm inland seas. Not all intelligence would need hands. Among giant grazing hadrosaurs, vocal cultures could bloom. Low, resonant bellows travelling for miles, each river valley developing its own dialect, its own history of remembered roots and ancient dangers. Migratory traditions might pass from elders to juveniles, a living map of Earth's changing climate etched into behaviour rather than written on paper. Would any of this ever cross the hazy threshold into what we would call civilization? The consequences would echo forward if it did, but the story does not have to rush there. On this world without extinction at the KPG, the spectrum of minds could be wider, stranger, more continuous, intelligence unfolding in feathers and scales without mirrors, telescopes, or cities. And somewhere, in the shadow of a volcanic arc, or along the margin of a drying inland sea, a different kind of breakthrough might be waiting, one that will force us to ask whether tools and cities are the only way a planet can wake up, In this quiet, branching timeline, we now step back even farther, until the question of tools and cities dissolves, and ask something simpler. If not us, then who fills the sky above the plains, the ridges of the mountains, the long silver lines of the coasts? Soften your shoulders and drift here for a while. But where our world has carved switchback roads and ski towns and reservoirs, this earth carries only the faint tracks of migrating dinosaurs and the seasonal scars of avalanches. Along the coasts, there are no ports, no breakwaters, no chains of container ships waiting beyond the harbour mouth. There are nesting grounds of marine reptiles and cliff-hanging colonies of pterosaurs, their wings catching the spray as easily as they catch the wind. Without human industry, the planet does not become still. Volcanoes still breathe fire along the arcs where plates collide, laying down fresh basalt dark and steaming. Asteroid fragments still pass near, and every few tens of millions of years a smaller rock may strike, gouging a new crater, disturbing but not resetting the story of life. Ice ages still advance and retreat, grinding valleys, dropping sea levels, locking water in bright transient caps. It would reshape how the creatures living through each pulse of cold or heat, yet across millions of years the forests and grasslands would flow back into the emptied spaces. In this humanless earth, some species become engineers without ever meaning to. Herds of massive sauropods, or their smaller descendants, open the forest into parkland, trampling saplings, spreading seeds in long arcs of dung. Burrowing mammals, still mostly small but numerous, honeycomb the soils, changing how rainwater sinks and how roots can reach. Somewhere in a cool, forested basin, an otter-sized mammal learns to pile branches in a stream, and the first beaver-like dams spread wetlands across a valley floor, inviting insects, fish, and feathered predators to gather. The crises of this world are slower, written in ash layers and glacial tills rather than in graphs of carbon dioxide and plastic fragments on distant beaches. There are die-offs and local extinctions, fires and floods and sudden freezes, but they unfold on scales that match the turning of continents rather than the turning of a century. From a certain angle, that distance can feel almost merciful. Let's ask you, just for a moment, to feel how small that makes our own history, and how strangely comforting that smallness can be. This traces an Earth that never needed us to be beautiful, or dramatic, or alive. And yet, somewhere beyond this quiet thought experiment, our version of the planet is still turning, still warming, still listening, perhaps, for what we choose to do next. So now, step out of the day once more, and imagine a different quiet future, millions of years beyond our alternate present, when the age of dinosaurs has grown old but not ended. Somewhere on a windswept plateau, beneath a pale sun, a small team of geologists kneels beside a cliff of layered rock, their hammers poised, their notebooks open to a history that was written in fire. With a gentle tap, a slab breaks free. The surface is brushed clean. There, only a few millimeters thick, runs a dusky band of clay, enriched in iridium, the metal from the stars. The same strange spike our own scientists found at Gubbio and around the world. The same fingerprint of a single impact that changed the energy balance of the entire planet in deep time. They measure it, sample it, whisper to one another. This is about a moment when Earth shuddered. Around them, the physical record is eerily familiar of vast pterosaurs. Just above, many of those great bodies vanish, their lineages dwindling into absence. Yet in the next beds, and the next, other dinosaurs endure. Small feathered hunters whose ancestors once darted between the feet of tyrannosaurs. Stocky, cold-tolerant herbivores with dense plumage and deep chests. Their tracks and eggs continue, step by step, into younger rock. Paleontologists in this different world gather in quiet conference rooms and crowded field camps, and the debates begin. We'll ask, they say, how such violence left so much alive. Did the Deccan eruptions and their volcanic gases prepare ecosystems for shock, softening the blow? Did coastal basins shield certain populations from the darkest years, letting them feed on seeds, carrion, and detritus while forests burned? Why did some dinosaurs shrink, burrow, and persist, while others, just as strong, simply stop? In their arguments, impact and volcanism trade places in importance, models rise and fall, and each new fossil above the iridium line can overturn a favoured theory in an instant. Everything afterward would be different if one more giant survived, or one fewer small omnivore made it through. We leave them there for a moment, with their thin clay boundary and their unanswered questions, because their world is a mirror held up to ours. The same crater, the same iridium, the same shocked quartz, yet a different cast of survivors, and so an utterly different future. All of that tangled contingency, all of those branching possibilities, pressed into a layer no thicker than a fingernail. If such a narrow band of clay can hold two different destinies, you might wonder what thin boundaries lie hidden in the next chapter of our own story, waiting to be crossed, or missed, or gently stepped around. Pressed into that thin boundary, let's find a pattern that repeats across Earth's history. Again and again, survival belongs not to the grandest or the most spectacular, but to the small, the hidden, and the quietly prepared. In the century of darkness after the impact, this pattern became stark, written in ash and silence. Burrowers had an advantage. Creatures that could retreat into the ground, into root-tangled chambers and rock-frame tunnels, carried their own refuge with them, insulated from firestorms above and the killing chill that followed. Small mammals, lizard-like reptiles, and invertebrates waited out the worst days in these pockets, their bodies needing little food, their lives already tuned to cramped spaces and sudden danger. Size itself became a strategy. When the food web thinned, when forests of ferns and conifers faltered under a sky veiled in dust, being small meant needing less energy, fewer mouthfuls of whatever scraps remained. Flexible diets mattered too. Animals that could eat seeds, carrion, roots, or detritus survived where specialists failed. The birds that made it through were likely ground-dwelling, drab and unassuming, pecking at seeds that lay dormant, tiny packets of stored sunlight scattered across a darkened world. Water offered its own shelters. Rivers, lakes, and coastal shallows became thermal blankets and hiding places, buffering the wild swings of climate above. Crocodilians, turtles, and amphibians. Survival was not a conscious choice. It was an accident of prior evolution, intersecting with sheer chance, being in the right burrow, the right pond, the right valley when the shockwaves passed. Life as a whole proved robust. The biosphere bent but did not break. Yet individual lineages were fragile, snapped off by circumstances they could never anticipate. Entire branches of dinosaurs vanished, while a few feathered lines and a scattering of mammals slipped through. Our own eventual existence hangs from those narrow threads. Let your breath slow, and let the day soften for a moment. We too live on a planet that has weathered darkness before, a world that has seen oceans freeze at the surface and forests burn from horizon to horizon, and still found ways to begin again. There is a quiet comfort in that, a reminder that extinction and renewal are both woven into the same long tapestry. Yet we'll ask a gentle, unsettling question. If resilience is real, but so is fragility, what does it mean to inherit a world already shaped by so many close calls? The answer will lead us from ancient ash layers to the faint, persistent signals our own civilization is now leaving in the rocks, and to another boundary that may already be forming beneath our feet. To answer that question, we return, gently, from the world that might have been to the world that actually was. The imagined plains of feathered tyrants and glassy dinosaur cities fade, and in their place comes a quieter, harsher scene. The real Earth, 66 million years ago, under a sky choked with dust. In this world, the rock did not miss. The impact carved the Chicxulub crater into the crust of Yucatan, released oceans of energy, and across millions of years turned a thriving dinosaur world into a wounded planet. The great non-avian dinosaurs, from Triceratops herds to Tyrannosaur hunters, did not weather the darkness. Their eggs cooled, their forests burned, their food webs unravelled. By the time the ash settled, almost all of them were gone. What survived was smaller, quieter, and often hidden. Tiny, shrew-like mammals in burrows, able to wait out the worst months on cached seeds and insects. Small, ground-dwelling birds, descendants of dinosaurs yet light enough to need little, tough enough to peck at fallen seeds when green leaves were rare. Crocodiles in muddy channels, turtles in half-frozen ponds, amphibians in leaf-lined pools. The world did not fall silent, but its voice changed. From that altered chorus, a different future began. Over millions of years, as sunlight slowly returned and plants recolonized ash-covered hills, mammals diversified into shapes that would have been impossible under dinosaur rule. Hoofed runners on new grasslands, tree climbers with grasping hands, nimble omnivores exploring every niche. Birds radiated into forests and coasts, wetlands and open skies, filling the air that pterosaurs once commanded. New ecosystems assembled themselves from old lineages, a patchwork world stitched together from survivors. Here is the unsettling, intimate part of the story. Our own presence depends on that absence. Without the extinction of most dinosaurs, there might never have been the ecological room for primates to emerge in tropical canopies, or for their descendants to experiment with language. For moments, we now follow that chain forward, from buried iridium to human fingerprints in the rocks, and ask what kind of boundary we are leaving for distant eyes to find. And now, as that chain stretches away into the dark, let's let it loosen, let it soften, until the sharp edges of cause and effect blur into a single slow current of time flowing past you. Breathe out slowly, and imagine a bright Cretaceous morning, 66 million years ago, when the air is warm and heavy with the scent of ferns, and the calls of dinosaurs roll through the forests and along the shallow seas. The sky is clear, the light is golden, and none of the creatures moving below have any sense of the rock far above, already falling, already aimed, already carrying more energy than all their beating hearts combined. This traces that day, but told now as a fading picture. The blue sky, the glinting waves, the slow sway of conifers in a world without winter. Then, in deep time, a new sun blooms low on the horizon, brighter than anything Earth has seen in hundreds of millions of years, and the world turns white. The impact carves its crater, throws mountains of vaporized stone into the air, and for a moment everything is fire. Let the image drift, let the fire dissolve into ash. The bright day dims to an ember red, then to deep grey, as dust and soot wrap the planet, and the century of darkness begins. Forests that once rang with calls now stand silent under a slow, cold rain of black snow. You do not have to hold every detail. You can let the outlines soften, as if you are watching through water. Time moves. Years pass. The ash settles into oceans and lakes, into river deltas and shallow bays, becoming thin lines in the rocks that future eyes will read. Somewhere under frozen surfaces, small mammals sleep and wake, sleep and wake. In deep channels, fish glide through chilled water. On quiet shores, waves continue their patient work, washing against ancient sand, washing against new ash, washing and retreating in the same rhythm over and over. Let the modern world fade away, and follow those waves. See them under a sky where the dust finally thins and stars return, wheeling slowly above continents that are still drifting, still colliding, still opening new oceans. Forests grow back in the dim light, first low and ragged, then taller, denser, until green once again covers the scars. Then they thin, they shift, they fade, and new forms take their place. You are moving now through millions of years as if through a single breath. Firestorms give way to misty mornings. Empty clearings fill with ferns, then with flowering shrubs, then with young trees. In those recovering woods, small feathered shapes hop from branch to branch, descendants of survivors, while heavier, horned silhouettes move in the distance, a new dinosaur world slowly assembling itself from what endured. We now ask you not to follow every branch and every name, but to rest in the feeling of it. Waves on ancient shores, stars over changing continents, forests growing and fading over and over while Earth keeps turning. Whether in our history of loss or in the world where extinction secret moment with the last frames of the story. Soften your shoulders, let the modern world fade away just for a little longer, and notice how far we have travelled. From the instant of impact, when a mountain of rock met the coast of Yucatan and released more energy than billions of bombs, to the fragile, flickering lives that learned to endure the darkness that followed. This is about how life survives night. Not only the 100 years when dust veiled the sun and forests went silent, but all the lesser nights that have followed, in which small creatures and later small mammals and eventually small humans waited and wondered if the light would return. In a flash of geological time, dinosaurs rose, ruled, and vanished. Within another, shrew-sized mammals tiptoed through ash and seed, carrying the future in their bones. Let's ask a gentle question here, at the edge of sleep. In a history so vast that continents drift and craters weather away, what does one life matter? A single mammal curled in a burrow during the impact winter, a single bird guarding the last hard seeds, a single person lying awake, listening to a story about worlds they will never see. The answer is quiet, but it is real. Each thread is small, but together they are the tapestry that kept Earth from going still. Your days, with their worries and their worn routines, are woven into that same fabric. You are another survivor of another kind of darkness, carrying memories, kindnesses, and questions forward through the years. It would reshape the world, for you and for those around you, if you could see your own life as part of this long, unbroken line of persistence. So we'll leave a door open for you. Whenever the hours grow long, whenever sleep is slow to arrive, you can return to this world of ancient oceans, impact scars and wandering dinosaurs, or to other journeys that wait beyond the horizon of the present moment. These stories will be here to keep you company, while the rest of the house is quiet. For now, there is nothing you need to do, nowhere you need to go. The crater has cooled. The fires have gone out. The world is resting, and you are allowed to rest with it. When you finally drift under, the story does not have to end. It can simply flow beneath you, as steady as plate tectonics, as patient as evolution. And when we open our eyes in the next chapter, we will find that the darkness itself has been busy, shaping a future that even the dinosaurs could never have imagined. When the darkness has finished its long, slow work, the world exhales. High above a quiet hillside, the last veils of ash have thinned to nothing, and the sky is finally clear, clean, and cold. The century of dust that once strangled the light has passed, and what remains is a night so transparent that every distant sun seems sharpened, every constellation etched with impossible precision. This concerns a single moment, on a single slope, under a sky that you already know. A lone, medium-sized feathered dinosaur stands there, outlined against the dim horizon. Its plumage is mottled umber and charcoal, tipped with pale edges that catch what little starlight there is, so that its outline seems to shimmer when it moves. Longtail held level for balance, forelimbs folded close, it plants clawed toes into the cooling soil, feeling the memory of the day's heat seeping and out. Air flows through its bird-like lungs, through air sacs woven deep into its bones, an efficient system that carried its ancestors through heat and hunger and near extinction. Its eyes are half closed, the nictitating membranes flicking once, then settling. It does not know the word future. It does not know that one day on this same Earth, other minds will study the boundary clay, measure iridium, and argue about its fate. It only knows the coolness on its feathers, the rhythm of its heart, the quiet between distant calls. Let your breath slow and settle in for a moment. You and this animal are separated by 66 million years, by all of human history, by every story you've ever heard, yet you share the same planet, the same thin film of air, the same arch of stars. You share the same need to rest between days, to surrender briefly the constant work of surviving. We'll ask you to imagine one last thing. As you watch that hillside, the scene does not cut or end. It simply darkens. The stars dim, not all at once, but gradually, as though someone were slowly lowering the universe's lanterns. The Milky Way fades to a ghost, then to a suggestion, then to nothing. The dinosaur's outline softens, dissolves into the night, and in that final gentle obscurity, you are invited to follow, down into the same quiet, under the same sky, carried by the same earth, into a sleep that, for a little while, erases the distance between you and every creature that has ever closed its eyes against the dark. For now, that is enough. The journey has carried us through impact and darkness, through the long, slow turning of Earth beneath ancient constellations, through the rise and fall of worlds that existed millions of years before your first breath. This is about a planet that endures, of life that bends but does not break, and tonight we let that story come gently to rest. Somewhere, in the deep archive of your mind, the images of dinosaurs and oceans and burning skies may still be glowing, faint as embers. You can let them cool. You can let the last T-Rex, the last fern-fringed crater, the last echo of the impact slip backward, as if the years themselves were a tide drawing quietly away from shore. If a stray thought returns to an asteroid hanging over the Cretaceous world, or to the century of darkness that followed, notice it, and then let it drift. Imagine it as a curl of ash lifted on a high wind, turning and thinning until it disappears into the upper air, leaving only clear, dark space behind. Nothing is required of you now, not memory, not attention, not effort. Breathe out slowly. Let the modern world fade away, more completely this time, so that even the idea of time, of history, of extinction and survival loosens and falls away. There is only the slow, tidal rhythm of your own breathing, rising and falling like waves on an ancient shore that no eyes will ever see again. In that imagined distance, the sea is very calm. The waves are small and patient, folding over themselves with a soft, repetitive hush. Far inland, in a forest that will never know cities, wind moves through tall fronds and high branches, a low, continuous murmur. No new